How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today I've got a very special guest for you all. He's actually a returning guest back on the podcast. Today I'm joined by an award-winning coach. He's got experience of working in elite sport from world champions to Guinness World Record holders. Today I am joined by the one and only Reiss Silva. How are you doing?
I'm very good, mate. Quite the introduction, but I'm better after that intro for sure.
Well, I know I mentioned obviously been a while since we last spoke. I know we caught up before recording just now, but yeah, how are you? What have you been up to? What's kind of been happening in your world, really?
Yeah, really good, mate. I'm actually working on kind of being more grateful, more present. So I'm actually really good. I think it's the first time in my life I'm not just focusing on what's next, what's next, which is a nice change. But yeah, I think quite a big change since we last spoke. I can't actually remember when the last time we spoke. Was it before lockdown or was it just after?
It was probably just after. It was around Christmas time. Christmas time we
Okay.
spoke. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So since then, I sort of opened up my own facility in Leeds. That's grown and grown and grown to the point now where we've got a couple of personal trainers and a physio working from there. And 2 years ago, I actually left the gym myself. So I sort of stepped away from the in-person coaching in order to move down to London, and I sort of transitioned the business completely online now. So quite a different situation I'm in from when we last spoke, where I was very much looking to build the gym and build the in-person type of stuff to now almost starting from scratch again and building the online side of things. But going good and I'm enjoying it, which is the main thing.
Nice, cool. And when you said there, which I think is quite important, especially for kind of like younger trainers, coaches, or coaches kind of getting into the fitness industry, strength and conditioning industry, if you like, and two very different stages in your career, if you like, of building a gym, building up that business, and thinking about right, what's next, what's next, what's next. Do you think that's, and this might be a little bit of a tangent, but do you think that's kind of where you're at now, a natural progression for younger trainers to get to a point where you need to have that time of, thinking what's next to get to a point where you can actually be more present in what you're doing now and be like, do you know what, actually, look at what you've done and enjoying where you're at now, if that kind of makes sense.
I think so. I think naturally when you're younger, it's almost like a process of life, really, isn't it? Like when you're younger, you are just looking forward because when you start in the industry you want to build your clients, and then you get X amount of clients and you want to work with a certain type of client, and then you're working towards that, and then you might go from doing hours in a local gym to then wanting to go and coach at an independent gym and paying rent, and then you might have ambitions of opening up your own studio, and it's just there's always that next thing in terms of like the coaching journey for sure. But I think you reach a certain point, and I know I did anyway, where it was almost becoming a little bit detrimental to always think what's next, because I looked back at certain points and had achieved some like amazing things that had, me starting out in this game would have been like, whoa, that's amazing, that's so good. And they just came and went, and I didn't really enjoy them at all. They were just done. And I looked back and I'm like, oh, so that thing that I was wanting for years was over in a split second. And I literally can't remember it really. It's kind of just done. And
Yeah.
so from that point, and that's happened a couple of times at least. And then kind of from that point, I thought, you know what? I need to actually just, it's a cliche to say, but enjoy the process and be present in the process and kind of just be in, the good days, the bad days, and just enjoy that experience. Because I think from my own personal journey, and it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on this, the kind of the times you look back on and the most enjoyable time is kind of like the difficult periods when you can see the end goal where you're slowly getting to it, but that little bit of improvement each day, and when something clicks and you're like, oh, it's really working, that's the most enjoyable part to me, as opposed to actually reaching the outcome. So definitely something I'm working on. But I think for younger coaches for sure, like really enjoy that initial 1 to 2 years where you're having to work, you're picking up clients, you're finding your way, because it is the most exciting time, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with that, and I think that's whether this is the right phrase or not, I'm not sure, but it kind of builds that character. It kind of builds that
Mm.
that work ethic around it because I think sometimes, like, I can't remember what the stat was, but it was kind of like PTs and coaches after the first 2 years they don't stay doing it. Whereas if you get past that point, that difficult bit, all of a sudden it's like, you've got that little bit more knowledge, you've got that confidence in yourself a little bit. Whereas, and I'm sure it's, people that you follow, look up to, that, it's taken them a long, long time to get to where they're at. Yourself, building up a gym, going online. It takes time. Takes time to do that, as opposed to, especially, since COVID, it's kind of everybody wants to be an online coach, and all of a sudden have loads of people doing that.
Yeah.
But you need that background in experience and knowledge. Because how have you found going online?
It's been hard. I can't lie. It's been really hard. It's almost been, I'd say, probably the most challenging period of my career, even from starting from complete scratch. Because I think the difference is when you start from scratch and you're in a gym, and I started at a pure gym where I was doing hours for rent kind of thing. You expect it to be hard because you're going into a new industry, and it's exciting and it's new. But when I moved to online, I was like, I've been doing this for 8 years now, and now I'm right back at the scratch and the start again. Like, oh, here we go again, kind of thing. And it felt a lot harder, and it was all really new to me in terms of what is online coaching, and what I thought it was versus what it actually is was completely different. In the gym, you can get clients semi easily. You can talk to people. It's quite easy to sell. Whereas online, it's like, okay, now you have to be really good at marketing. Why is someone going to go coach with you online versus go to their local PT, and all these kind of things that come with it? And so what I found was the business side of things from, my business was way more important. As a coach, one to one was really good. And as a coach, I was really good. But as a business, now I had to really dial in on, what's your lead generation, what's your marketing, what's the front end, the back end of the business, how much money you putting into, like, it was the first time I felt like I had a business and not a job. Uh, and I think, yeah, so for anyone kind of, I guess a lot of people are going online. I think post lockdown, you kind of saw a real big spike in it. You saw a big spike in the influencers getting, big pages and getting clients. Whereas now it's coming out of that now, where you actually have to be good, and you have to be good at marketing, good as a coach, because people have had 5 years of wising up to bodies aren't doesn't mean that you're a good coach. So it's definitely become more saturated and more difficult, but and very challenging, but very rewarding as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you kind of going back to what we said at the start, those first couple of years, starting out and learning your craft is really important. So, once you get to a position where, maybe you want to go online or anything like that, you've kind of got um you've got that toolkit to be able to deal with that a little bit more. Whereas, especially some of the younger coaches coming in, maybe like, straight out of uni, they've got loads of knowledge, but how do you apply that? How is that actually going to work? Which has been interesting to try
Yeah.
and help with that a little bit.
Yeah, and you don't ever get taught this stuff, do you? Like,
Mm.
you taught your PT qualifications, your S&C qualifications, you even, you do masters up to that level, and you get taught the hands-on, they're very intelligent people who do masters in S&C. They know, probably way more than I do, but you never get taught the business side of things. Like, you never get taught about, well, how do you market to a client? How do you what's the journey of that client to make them stay longer than 3 or 6 months? Like, even simple things like, okay, well, are you charging per session versus, monthly subscriptions? And yeah, so that's kind of like, and I'm sure when you're doing your work with your guys, you're helping them massively on that front, because there definitely needs to be more done on that side of things, because it is a very attractive and appealing career, but a lot of people go into it and then they're like, well, I got all this knowledge, but I don't have any clients and I don't know how to keep them. And that's why you probably see that sort of like, yeah, I think it's even down to 6 months now where
Right.
PT join and they leave the industry, which is crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, because if that was in any other job and there was a turnaround of 6 months in the job, you'd be like, what is going on here? Yeah, okay, cool. Well, I think, we've mentioned there a little bit about how you've progressed and going to kind of the coaching side of things, with the athletes that you've worked with, especially within elite sport, the end product is the result in the ring, on the pitch, on the court. And I suppose maybe something that doesn't get spoken about a lot is um pressure of that situation. You've mentioned there, looking back, the Reiss starting out would have been like, wow, look at what I've been able to do. I kind of wanted to get, what is your definition of pressure within those situations, and kind of does that ever change, throughout the athletes that you've worked with, or do you just adapt to be able to manage it, if that kind of makes sense?
No, it makes sense. It's a great question. I actually put a post out about this the other week where it was two other coaches, and it was essentially saying, everyone wants to work with the elite level athletes, right? They got a dream. They're like, I want to work right at the top. And I said, you should have those goals. You should want to be the best you can be, but you also need to be aware of what comes with being at that level. And that is, like you mentioned, the pressure of it. Because if you're working with a Premier League footballer, a boxer preparing for a world title, an athlete preparing for the Olympics, the margin for error is minute. So you have to get it right. When you're on the regional circuit or local circuit, there's a lot more room for error. It's not as high level. When you get to that elite level, there is no room for error. You have to get it right because these people are training for 12 weeks, a season, 4 years when it comes to the Olympics for that one moment. And if it doesn't go perfectly, and if they, that doesn't necessarily mean winning, but if they kind of come out that event like, I didn't perform, you are going to be the first one whose head's on the chopping board. Unfortunately, that's just the way it goes. They don't tend to look at their kind of technical coaches first. It is the S&C guy. Taking one of my fighters, for example, if they were going into a world title fight and didn't win that fight because they thought, oh, the last 4 rounds, I just felt empty. I couldn't. I'm the one they're blaming because I'm in charge of the fitness, right? So you have to be aware that elite sports is amazing and it should be an ambition to be as good as you can, but it does come with that pressure. And one of my favorite quotes is pressure is a privilege, right? And that's kind of changed my mindset on it. Is that yes, there are pressure situations, and rather than being like, oh God, I need to get this right, there's no room for error. What if this goes wrong? You actually just remind yourself that okay, every other strength coach would love to be in this position, preparing their athlete for this event. So it's a privilege you're in this position. Now, you just got to deal with it. And I guess in answer to your question, that does it change with athletes? I think slightly, but not in terms of maybe how people are expecting it. The only way I think it changes after a certain amount of time, you build trust with the athlete. You build, they believe in you, they trust you, they know that you're doing the best for them, which comes after a period of time. In which case, if you've been, it's your first event with an athlete and it doesn't go well, you're probably going to be getting the elbow. If it's been 3, 4 years and you've been there for them, not even just in their sport, but outside of that as well, and you like each other, you get on, you build the relationship, then there's obviously even subconsciously some kind of benefit gets given to you where they probably have the attitude of, okay, I didn't feel as good as I could, but how do we work on that together? How do we do X, Y, and Z? And I think that's the big thing that I've noticed is it is all about relationships. And you'll know that yourself when it comes to coaching, it's a relationship business, isn't it? Like
Absolutely.
the sets and reps aren't the thing that builds your business or builds, who you work with. It's the relationships. Relationships are like the fundamental of all coaching businesses.
Absolutely. And just touching on that, because I was quite glad you mentioned there about the trust with the athlete, but then also you've mentioned, if they were tiring in the last couple of rounds, or whatever it may be, how much, when that margin for error gets smaller, how much is it of, looking at previous programs and knowing what works, and how much is being like, well, actually, we just need to take this out and just base it off what makes them feel good?
Mm.
Because, you look at strength and conditioning books, journals, whatever it be, and like there, he's like, no, this is how you're like gonna do power. This is how you can do speed, whatever else it is. Whereas, sometimes the athlete might just be like, nah, I don't like doing that. Like it doesn't make me feel good. They might not enjoy it, or they might just not have buy-in for it. How do you balance that to make sure that you're getting it right for that athlete rather than just being like, well, this is what this says, so this must be the program that we need to do?
Yeah, it's such a great question because that is the big battle. And for the early part of my career, I'd say for like a good number of years, it would really get the best of me where I'd be struggling to switch off, to be honest. And I'd be lying in bed and something would pop into my head. I'd be like, oh, should I have done that instead? Or could I change that to that? And it was honestly not great. So I think it comes with experience as well. The longer you're in it, the more kind of less sensitive you get to certain situations. So I think that's a big part of it, just time in the game. Um, but again, then it comes down to what you're actually seeing, because I think you've got science on one end of the scale, and then you've got your own personal experience of what you've seen on the other end. You can't just do all of what you want to do because it might not always be right. But then science gives you a good guide, but it doesn't tell you everything. It doesn't tell you
Yeah.
that specific athletes' likes. It doesn't tell you their injury history. It doesn't tell you where they're at in camp and who they're fighting and all these kind of stuff. So you almost have to weigh up both of these and put it together in the middle. And I think the way I've done it anyway is, you use the science, you look at other coaches and what they're doing, you try it out a little bit, you see what bits are good, what bits aren't working. And over time, you kind of refine into what becomes your coaching system, and your principles and your methods that you have that just work. And then you've also got to bring in the fact that you're working with a person before an athlete. And so you need to consider, yes, you could have the perfect program by the book, but how much more benefit would you get if the program wasn't quite as good, but the athlete was enjoying the session more? The athlete had more intent in what they're doing because they were enjoying it. The athlete was getting through more work, more volume because they were enjoying it and because they were doing certain exercises that they like and certain exercises that they correlate to good performance. So, for example, I had an athlete who typically I never do any Olympic weightlifting with my clients because it takes too much coaching. And especially for fighters, it's quite high risk in terms of wrist and shoulder mobility, etc., etc. But I had a guy who, UFC fighter, and he'd been training in America. And so they're very big in Olympic weightlifting there. And when he came over, he was just like, oh, we're not doing any of my cleans and split jerks and things. I was like, oh, I don't typically do that. It's high risk. Da, 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 da. And he kind of said, no, but that's how I get powerful. That's where I get my punch power from. That's where I get my explosiveness for. And over time, he had just linked doing Olympic weightlifting with powerful. And so if I took that out, and yes, I could weigh up it's bad for the wrist and there's higher risk of injury and it's technically harder, but what I'm losing by him getting rid of the thing that makes him powerful is way more. And
Yeah, yeah.
so I had to sprinkle in a little bit of what he wanted without really telling him it. So I'd be like, okay, we're just gonna do 2 reps and we're gonna do 3 sets. I'd keep it lighter. Then he would think, I'd say, oh yeah, this is like 40% of your 1 rep max. He'd be like, all right, yeah, cool. It would be more towards 20%. So I'd keep it a little
Yeah.
bit lighter so he could be more explosive. So that's where I think you have to weigh up what your research is telling you versus what your own anecdotes are telling you, what you've seen work, and then sprinkling a little bit of, okay, what does this athlete need and how we're going to get the best out of him or her?
Yeah, definitely. I thought it was good when you said there, what it's actually going to take away would be like huge, the programming side of things, um there's so much stuff that you can do to still get that end product. Whereas if you don't have that buy-in, all of a sudden it's just everything's going to be an uphill battle.
Yeah.
When you've said there about he's come over from a background of weightlifting, and that's what they've done there. And this is probably more so maybe for coaches advice for coaches and trainers listening. How have you found dealing with those situations? Because we touched on before about over time you create your systems and you get maybe comfortable with how it is. Where if somebody comes from another coach or another environment of training, and it's kind of like, well, actually, this is how what I found to do with that. How do you kind of manage that situation? I know you've mentioned, adding in a little bit from there, but how do you manage that in terms of communicating that with the athlete? Because, especially for the elite level, sometimes, what rather than one thing changed in programming, something said the wrong way, it might be like, oh, is this really the right coach for me? If that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does, and it happens. It's a really important thing to figure out as you go through it because communication is key. Like you say, you can make or break a relationship with communication. And when you first meet an athlete, you don't have the trust. You don't have, you're just a new coach. They don't know if you're good, don't know if you're going to get results. Further down the line, when you've had 6, 7, 8 camps with them and they know that you're good, you can say, oh, how would you feel about trying this out? This is what I think would work, and I think it'd be really, really good. They're going to typically go for it, but you don't have that at the start. And you might even have a situation, which I've had quite a few times, where they've moved from somewhere else, whether that's country or regions within the UK. And that's the reason they've left their strength coach. So they've got a really good relationship and a really good trust. And the only reason they're training with you is because they've moved to Leeds, for example, where my gym
Yeah.
was. And so you got to balance that, and you've got to meet them where they currently are. And so I typically just ask them, right? As part of the sort of onboarding process, they'll do a few questionnaires and I'll ask them, from nutrition standpoint, what food do you enjoy eating? What have you typically done in your weight cuts? What do you normally do through camp? From a training standpoint, what do you normally do training? What does your training week normally look like? In strength and conditioning, what are the things you feel like you need to work on? And so I'm just getting their opinions. And in the first session, I'll just be talking to them about these kind of things. Like, oh, okay, so you do a lot of weightlifting. Like, all right, so how comes you've done that? Like, do you find it beneficial? They're like, yeah, I love it. Like, that's one thing I can never not do. And straight away, you're making a mental note saying, okay, that has to be in the program. Um, and then it's over time sprinkling in and transitioning and taking them on this journey of where they are to what you want to do.
Yeah.
Time's the main thing. You can't just go straight in and be like, right, we're doing it my way, and no, that's not good, which can happen. Let's say, using the example, because we've been talking about it, the Olympic weightlifting, I could have said, oh, no, we're not doing that. That's really high risk. That's too technical. It's a waste of time. You've got a little bit of shoulder mobility issues that could really injure you. And because it's just going to be a massive clash that you
Yeah.
don't need and you're going to lose the trust. So it's, sprinkling it in, as I said, lower reps, lower weight, doing it that way, and then just talking to him about certain things and showing them. Athletes tend to learn by feeling a certain way. So,
Mm.
for example, in that situation, communication comes very rarely through talking, but more through, okay, put this vest on, this weighted vest on for me, and I want you to do. We're going to do a jump test now. Let's see how strong you are. So straight away you got buy-in because they're like, okay, let's get competitive now, and I can show you the leaderboard of where everyone else is, and they're asking you, oh, what's the top score? I'm like, okay, I'll mark out where the top score is. Try and beat that. And they got this weighted vest on. We'll do 3 jumps, and they're really into it. Can we do another set? Yeah, we can. And then just talk to them. Okay, how did that feel versus doing the Olympic lifting? And they'll be like, oh, it felt good to be fair. Like it felt really good. I was like, oh, it's interesting. Do you know why we're doing it? No, no, no. Oh, so essentially when we do the weightlifting, we're achieving X, Y, and Z. And we're actually achieving that same thing through doing this. So it's actually a really good option. If you're ever feeling sore after sparring and your arms are tight, we can just put the weighted vest on and do that. And I'm not forcing on him, but it's just
Yeah.
planting the seed. And then, further down the line, oh, you said about shoulder, my shoulders are feeling a bit tight today. Can we do the weighted vest? I want to see if I can beat that score. And then you start transitioning, and then they start relating that new thing to being powerful, and you can kind of start phasing it out. That's just what I've seen from my experience is that yes, you can talk to an athlete, but typically athletes aren't the best communicators themselves. They want to just come and they just work, right? They just
Yeah.
work, especially with fighters. It's crazy, really. A lot of the fighters that I've coached have had some form of ADHD, I think, like 90%. It's definitely like a fighting thing. And so they're 100 miles an hour. they're not going to tell you the information you need anyway through talking. So there's being open, there's asking questions, there's showing them as opposed to actually communicating, this is what we're going to do. You need to speak their language, which is, oh, put this on, do these jumps. How powerful did you feel? Like, oh God, yeah, I feel really powerful. That's going to really help with me shooting a takedown. Yeah, yeah, it is. That's their language, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I know from they want to do their sport, they want to do what they enjoy doing, because they've got to a certain point, speaking from a rugby background, they get to a certain point where it's like, all right, now we maybe need to think about strength and conditioning. I know from the rugby league teams that I've worked with, more so with their like scholars and academy players, they're just like, yeah, but I'm good at rugby, and I'm like, yeah, I know, but we want to be thinking about how can this help you on the pitch, which I think is interesting. Same with fighters, with the when you've spoken about the communication there, if people are moving around, because life happens when people are moving around. How this is maybe again from maybe a coaching point of view, do you think, by not listening to the athlete or just being quite strict of, look, you're doing this, because there can be that thing of, like what you mentioned about the athlete coming in and doing weightlifting before. Sometimes your ego can get in the way of be like, no, I'm the coach. This is what we're going to do. This is the system. This is kind of like the gym rules, if you like. Do you think that actually is more detrimental to the athlete, who then starts bouncing around to different coaches trying to find a solution to actually make them better, and then actually they just end up spinning the wheels and never actually progressing in their sport or in their career, if that kind of makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is detrimental. I think you need consistency and time in anything you do. You see that across any sports. You see that not just with athletes, but managers at football clubs. And, I'm an Arsenal fan, and there was a time where Mikel Arteta, for example, lost I think 12 Premier League games in a row or had a draw, and it's like he should have been sacked. And in 99% of occasions, he would have been out the door. But you give him time, and then he's built a really good squad now. So it happens in all kind of areas of sport. What I typically find, though, if I'm being honest, is especially in the sort of combat sports world, is the ones that sort of move around gym to gym. There's normally a couple of reasons why. The first is because they want yes men around them,
Right.
and they don't want to have anyone who isn't pandering to them or giving them exactly what they need. It's like, I do it this way, this is how we're going to do it. And the coach is there like, well, no, I think we need to do this. And it's a bit of a clash, and they end up going. Or it's a little bit of a get out, where rather than looking internally or inward, okay, like, why did I lose that fight, or why didn't I perform? What could I have done better? It's a blaming it on external factors, that coach didn't do this coach didn't do that. I'm going to go and find elsewhere. So that's just what I've seen from my own experiences. That tends to be what happens. Especially in fighting as well, you'll see a lot of good fighters who stay with their coach, regardless if they win, they draw, and they just improve and they focus on themselves and what can I do better. And I think that's like an elite level mindset to have. But if you are moving around gyms and you go from here to there, I think, yeah, it probably is long term going to be detrimental to performance, because consistency is one of the main things you need. You can be on an average program, but if you're doing it consistently over a long term, you're probably still going to see pretty good results. And so I think time is one of the most important things that you do need. So if you are sort of doing 2 months here, 2 months there, 2 months there, you probably are going to see limitations in how well you develop physically and technically as well.
Yeah, definitely. A good example that you said there with managers. You've got time to you have to have time to get buy-in. Get people to follow that system, but then actually give the performances. performances an opportunity to use that system and actually see the results of it,
Mm.
which I think sometimes gets overlooked because you're not gonna be more powerful after just 2 sessions, whereas because going back to what you said right at the start about the margin for error is so small at the elite level, it's kind of anything that you put in needs to have that impact, whereas actually sometimes time is um a valuable tool to
Mm.
to,
Yeah.
to 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 invest in. One thing that you said there as well is about mindset, and
Mm.
from the athletes that you've worked with, the results kind of speak for themselves. But for those athletes who you've taken through from
Mm.
regional level, up, how moving on from what you said about mindset, how does the mindset change from whether they're maybe training, let's say, for example, twice a week,
Mm.
whereas now, okay, well, we need to do a little bit more
Mm.
because, you're on a national level, you're on an international level scale now. How do you kind of approach the mindset around training, around preparation, and getting this done because, the level of their performance is going up?
I always talk to my guys about the one percenters, right? The I always ask them the question of, and we do this in our check-ins as well. What's the smallest thing you can do this week that's gonna take you a step forward? Like, don't think about what's a thing you can do, what's a small thing, like what's the smallest thing you can do that's gonna take you forward this week? And that's something that it's kind of one of my coaching principles, I guess. A good example is I work with an MMA athlete who's been with me for about 4 years now. As an amateur, done really well, won gold medals in silver medal in the world championship, turned over pro. And if I kind of showed someone what he's doing now from a training, nutrition, recovery standpoint, they'd probably look at it and be like, there's nothing special there. This is just probably an average person. But if I went back 4 years to what he was doing, you'd see a massive, massive improvement in terms of prioritizing sleep, simple things like eating enough protein and prioritizing carbohydrates when he's sparring and these kind of things, but something that if I would have told him to do that 4 years ago, it would have just gone over his head, been so overwhelming. He wouldn't have understood it, wouldn't have seen the point, and he would never have done it. And so, what we've done over that 4 year period is just on repeat is like, okay, well, what's the next smallest thing that we can do? Where are you at the moment? How do we get you 1 millimeter forward? And then we just add the next thing, then the next thing, and the next thing. And before you know it, you're 4 years down the line and you've changed so much, and now you're
Yeah.
starting to live like an athlete and sleep like an athlete and eat like an athlete and train like an athlete and recover like an athlete. You've got all these things, but it's important that that becomes a really slow process, because if you overshoot it and you get a client and you sort of say, look, we're going to do this, it's just too overwhelming. I can't do a lot of that stuff. If I'm trying to train for something, I just need two or three things that I'm focusing on,
Yeah.
and that's me, and I can really nail them and do them very well. Because again, these are athletes, and they're going to be elite level athletes, but they're just people. He was just a 19-year-old kid when I met him. And so, what 19-year-olds are going to bed at 9 p.m. and tracking their food. It's just not happening, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I always like to stick to that, the one percenters, and what's the smallest thing that you can do. And the athletes know as well, and because like you're always the way I see it is that you're always trying to go up to a next level, next level, next level, right? And before you get to that level, you're not the person who is at that level yet. You're just not, right? You who sat there, Steve, as someone in 2025, you're completely different to what you'd have been this time last year, the year before, the year before. And similar to myself, PT in Pure Gym Reese was not, as developed as the one that went to Graft House, and he wasn't as developed as the one that went to the Strength Box. And if I picked up PT from Pure Gym Reese and put him into you're a gym owner now and you got to manage people, not a clue what to do. It would have been an absolute shit show. And
Yeah.
so what we need to do is just build up the tolerance to these levels. So incremental improvements And then they're obviously incremental fights as well. The level's going up and up and up, and we're just matching it, and they feel comfortable there. And before you know it, they're turning pro, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm a pro fighter now." And then they go to British level. I'm British level. I'm European level. I'm world, and it just happens slowly. And the biggest mistake a lot of people make is they keep doing the same stuff they've always have all the way through the levels. If they're a good fighter, they get away with it. They keep winning. And then they get to a British, European, or world level. And then they're like, all right, it's a big fight coming up. I need to change. They try and change everything in a 3 month timeline. It's too much. It doesn't work. It freaks them out because it's all new, and it makes the brain go crazy. Like, what are we doing? I'm not used to this. And you see that in the performance where they end up just really underperforming because they're just overwhelmed. So yeah, in answer to your question, I think that answered it in terms of like just focus on those one percenters. Like, what is the smallest thing that you can do?
Yeah, I think with the athlete that you mentioned that you worked with there over those 4 years, I can tell that you're speaking from like, look, it does work. You can see that as one of your principles, that's something that speaking from like this works. This is like the proofs in the pudding. I suppose maybe reflecting on that in terms of the actual progression. Have you had instances or athletes where maybe your mindset has changed to be like, does it switch from that thing of right, they were amateurs, okay, now we're pro? Does your mindset change, or is your kind of role, or do you see it as trying to keep the athlete grounded? So you're just sticking with that principle, or have you ever had times where your mindset has changed and being like, oh no, wait, we need to do this, we need to do that?
Yeah, 100%. Again, it comes down to the individual because you need to just know how they respond, right? You need to know if you say to them, look, we're in a big fight now, you have to do this, that could freak them out and be like, oh shit, like what's going on? Like, so you have to take the individual, and honestly you'll meet every type of person, which is why I guess going back right to the start, if you are thinking about going to an online coach, I think you should be working in the gym anyway, just to coach as many different people as you can so you can spot the signs really quickly. But yeah, there'll be times where you have to ground an athlete and just kind of be like, look, nothing's new, we're just adding this little thing on, adding this small thing on. Sometimes they'll even say to you like, oh, okay, now the next year is going to be a big year. I just need to dial in a little bit and add a couple of things. And like, yeah, you definitely need to do that. And then vice versa. There's times where the athlete might be more of a relaxed person, blase. Typically, this happens with the really talented ones where they're so talented, they're kind of like, I'll be all right regardless of what I do. And you have to kind of just remind them, like, no, we're in a big fight here, whether it's like, I don't know, unification title fight. So like we're in the elite of the elite now. You need to, what you think's your best, you need to go to a new level, and we need to push, and we need to, there's times where that needs to happen. And like I said, it typically happens with the really talented fighters because, their whole life, regardless of the level they've been at, they've just been okay. They've just got through
Yeah,
it. So, but they're probably, we're talking like the 0.1% of the elite. So most of the time it's just building it up gradual. Going back to that same example, actually, he messaged me actually out the blue the other day and just sort of said, look, great session today, got this done. We really need to step it up now. This is, it's time to get serious now. And he's had the switch in his head and like, cool, that's perfect. Let's go without me even having to say anything. And so now then what I did off the back of it was send him over like, oh, here's a couple of things that I'd really like to just tweak with what we're doing. Yeah, let's go. But that comes through again, building the relationship and having the trust. And coaching is essentially if you take yourself out of the picture, what does that athlete do? If they're sat there wondering like, oh no, I need someone to hold my hand and tell me what to do, you're not really coaching them. You're
yeah.
sort of dictating. Whereas if you pull yourself out and the athlete's like, or so this is going to be so sad, but one of my favorite messages I get from clients, you'll relate to this, is, "Hey Reiss, I was feeling absolutely fried today. I'm sparring tomorrow, so instead of doing that sprint session, I actually just went and did a recovery mobility session, had a sauna, so I'm ready to go tomorrow." Like that for me, I'm like, yes, this guy is being coached. And I think that's the beauty of coaching. It's person dependent. There'll be times where you got to tell them, look, we're in a real fight here. But on the whole, I think it's just those small tweaks, and then they start taking responsibility once they're educated enough to essentially do their own thing. And you're just there just to guide them when they have questions.
Absolutely. I think I can completely agree with having that as a message because yeah, a little bit of a tangent, but a guy that I've trained for powerlifting and strongman, and I say this to all the clients that I work with, I can put the plan together and kind of like guide where we're going, but I don't know how you're feeling unless you tell me, how that set felt, so that information is really important. And that plan can be changed and adjusted. Like I say, we're just going in that direction. And it
Mm,
only ever happened once, but he basically had a strongman competition coming up, and one of the events was like max rep deadlifts in 2 minutes or whatever it was. And his deadlift was going really, really well. And I was like, look, we don't need to go too heavy. Like it's just about reps. And no joke, like a week before, he just decided to test his deadlift. And I was just like, what are you doing? What's going on? And he was like, oh well, I was just feeling really good. And I was like, yeah, I know, but that wasn't the point of it. Anyway, got to the event, got to the competition day. The event didn't go too well on deadlifts. And then fast forward, that was probably a year, just over a year ago. Fast forward this now, again, similar message of like, because he's a teacher as well.
mm,
So it's like, some days you'll have really stressful days, really busy days with marking or whatever it is. And then it's now got to a point where he's like, yeah, actually, so he's got a membership where he can go and use the sauna or the spa. So now I'm like, right, we've got to that point where we've got an understanding of like, look,
mm.
we want to be able to manage that a little bit, but like what we've touched on throughout this chat of like just building that relationship and communication with it,
Yeah.
because on reflection, maybe it was how I communicated with him to
Mm,
to to do that deadlift or anything. So yeah, having that autonomy and that I'm a big believer in like independence as a
yeah.
as a client and an athlete. And then we're there to be like, okay, cool, this is the direction that we're going for.
That's
Um,
that's like negative reinforcement, isn't it? Like we speak a lot about positive reinforcement in terms of, oh, well, trust me and we'll do this and you feel really good. But on the other side, there's also negative reinforcement where you do something wrong and you realize that, oh shit, yeah, coach was right. I should have done X, Y, and Z. And that can happen from a coaching standpoint as well, in terms of you might, it doesn't always work where you tell the athlete to do something, trust me, it will work. Sometimes it doesn't work, and then it's like negative reinforcement on your side where you have to sort of say to them, do you know what, actually, hold my hands up. I got that one wrong. Let's dial in. Here's why I think it went wrong. Let's just tweak it a little bit. But yeah, I think it's really interesting because I don't think there'd be athletes if they felt great and didn't want to push themselves.
Yeah, yeah, and I thought that was a really good point there because, for your self football, myself playing rugby, it's as part of a team, a missed pass, a drop ball, like mistakes happen, and that's why I think coach and athlete, it's a team. It's not a case of like, well, no, that's it. Like you should do exactly what I say or anything like that because sometimes within like a team sport, somebody can do a moment of magic and be like, all right, fair enough, you did that, but it's that communication and always going back to your point, how do you move forward from that? It's you take those lessons or you get that information and be like, right, how do we apply that? How do we implement that? Quite a lot of topics and tangents thrown in there, Reese. But really, really enjoyed everything that we've chatted about there. I think some really good content and information for everyone listening. But the last question that I like to ask for everyone listening, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom from everything that we've chatted about today?
Oh, good one. Round this up. I say I've actually really enjoyed this conversation. It's been something different to, actually talking about the sets and reps and actually
Mm.
speaking about it's kind of more important because, like I said, the people listening, they know about the sets and reps, and there's so many different methods, but it's it's the buy-in, it's the relationships, it's the coaching, the communication that's really, really important. I would say the first thing is it's person first, athlete second. So know the person, know what makes them tick, communicate to them, build the relationship before you're even thinking about them as an athlete. And then I think the second one, which is massive, is that pressure is a privilege. Like in if you're starting out, you've probably got a goal that you want to achieve in 5 years. And when you hit that goal and you're at a high level and the pressure is really high, just remember that you would have given anything to be in that position 5 years ago. And there are hundreds of coaches who want to be in your position. And so that pressure is something that you should welcome. If you're not in pressure situations, then it probably means you should be doing more. Those are probably the 2 points I'd pick out from today.
Nice. Some really good words of wisdom there. And I think, when you said at the start there about, a different conversation rather than, sets and reps, we touched on it earlier. There's information out there, there's books out there. Whereas, again, what we said at the start is a lot of things when it comes to training and coaching is, how do you get the best out of the athlete? How do you adapt to the athlete? How do you, get those results? And I think the whole thing of this is the best program. I think now most people will look and think, is it? It's actually, how that is delivered, how is that adapted to meet that person, which I think sometimes, yeah, gets overlooked, and ultimately, it's detrimental to the results that athletes going to get. Whereas get it right, and you can see some really really good results as a coach. So yeah, really really good to catch up with you, Reiss. Thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. For everyone listening who might have any questions about what we've spoken about today, want to see the content that you put out there, or reach out to you, where can people find you or reach out to you?
Yeah, so Instagram's the best bit for everything S&C and sort of my work with fighters, and that's Reiss_Silva11. And then I've actually just started going to start, watch this space, posting on TikTok regularly. But what I want to show on TikTok is more about me and my entrepreneurial journey and my life and that sort of stuff. So if that's of more interest, then that TikTok's the best place for that.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for taking the time to jump on, Reiss. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.